Good evening and welcome to tonight's program titled How to Plan for the Future, a webinar for navigating life care planning for loved ones with ASD. My name is Dr. Susan Brasher, and I'm the program chair with the Atlanta Autism Consortium's Board of Directors. The AAC is a nonprofit organization dedicated to creative collaborative conversations throughout the Metro Atlanta autism community and beyond. We host free programs just like this on a wide variety of topics and are so glad you've joined us. Before we get started, we've just a few reminders. As an attendee, your microphone and camera will remain muted, but you can ask questions you have throughout the program in the chat by clicking on chat at the bottom of your screen. We'll also have time at the end of the program to fully address your questions. Additionally, we'll be emailing out the contact information for our panelists to the email address you use to register for this program so that you can contact them directly with any further questions you might have. Tonight, we're joined by a panel of experts in financial planning. Rick Knight has worked in the financial service industry for more than 25 years and has held 6 professional securities and insurance licenses. He's the founder of Servant Financial Group, a boutique financial service firm dedicated to providing financial planning solutions to the disability and faith-based communities. He's the author of 6 books on various financial planning subject matter, including The Good Harvest Plan, which is a financial planning guide exclusive for parents who have children with disabilities. We'll also send out these bios at the end of this so you can read all the great information we have for the rest of our colleagues as well. And then I'll move to Heather Nadler, who is one of just 13 attorneys in the state of Georgia to be certified as an elder law attorney by the National Elder Law Foundation as accredited by the American Bar Association. Her practice is concentrated in the areas of special needs law, elder law, and estate planning. Heather earned a BS in International Business with concentrations in Spanish and Management Information Systems from Auburn University. She received her JD from Tulane University School of Nursing and has published several articles in Family Law Quarterly and the Georgia Bar Journal and the Atlanta Lawyer magazine as well. And she's the past chair and served as the board of directors of the Elder Law section of the Atlanta Bar Association. Michael Kipnis has spent more than 30 years helping his clients achieve their financial goals. In 1983, he began his financial services career in New York City, achieving his Chartered Life Underwriter CLU designation in 1986 and his Chartered Financial Consultant CHFC designation in 1987. In 2006, Mike achieved his Chartered Advisor for Senior Living CASL designation, and most recently received his Chartered Special Needs Consultant CHSNC designation in 2014. He joined the Piedmont Group in Atlanta, a general agency of Massachusetts Mutual Life Insurance Company, or Mass Mutual, in Atlanta, and was appointed to Assistant General Agent in 2011. And we have David Morrow, who spent more than 22 years helping his clients achieve their financial goals. He received a BA in political science from the University of Delaware. In 1990, he began his financial service career with MBNA in Newark and then moved to Shaker Heights, Ohio, holding several management roles. In 2005, he and his family relocated in Woodstock, Georgia, and he became the vice president of sales for Prime Pay for Georgia, Alabama, and Texas. David followed his lifelong dream to become a financial consultant with Mass Mutual and working with families, business owners, employees, and special needs families to achieve their financial goals. He also serves as an active volunteer in the special needs community, as a legacy advisor with Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, and a member of the Marcus Autism Center Advisory Council. And with that, I want to welcome the panel to the Atlanta Autism Consortium monthly program.
Thanks, Susan.
Thank you so much, Rick.
Okay, Rick, would you like to lead us?
Absolutely. And Dr. Brasher, everyone else on the panel, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much. We're going to take off tonight talking about life insurance and life insurance strategies as they are applicable to special needs plan. And I would like to touch on just one quick thing before we get going. My approach in the financial services industry is more of a holistic approach where we want to be an advocate and resource and serve as the advisory in the advisory role. And one of the things that we were able to do a couple of years ago is with the last book that was published, we were able to turn that book into an online course, a life planning online course, actually the first in the nation. and it was purchased by the Georgia Department of Education for their state schools, their hearing and vision impaired schools. So that online course is right now. It was onboarded a couple of years ago and is now in about 300 families within the disability community with respect to partnering with the Georgia DOE. So, with that being said, we're going to talk about life insurance and the importance of life insurance planning in the life planning phase of special needs. And personally, life insurance is one of the cornerstones of estate planning, but life insurance definitely has a place in the disability community, and navigating through that can be a big job because you have to look at just certain things when you consider life insurance and how it's changed over the last 25 years since I've been in this industry. And it plays that vital role when it comes to making sure that in the future, or it used to be just in the future, that the individual with the disabilities quality of life would not be disrupted. I always say that life insurance, you're going to leave your loved ones in one of three ways: worse off, better off, or the same. And life insurance gives you the opportunity to choose that. One of the things that starting out first is figuring out what type of life insurance you need, and there's a lot of different names for it now. But life insurance, in its simplest forms, breaks down into two different buckets. It's either permanent or temporary. Permanent is more practical when you're doing long-term planning. Uh, Temporary or term is only for that term, 10-year, 5-year, but it's also the most cost effective when you may be just starting out and needing a large amount of life insurance. Sometimes coupling the two of them, long term and or permanent and short term or term, works best when you're doing long term planning because there is no one size that fits all. And you have to consider a lot of different things when you are doing life insurance planning. You've got to calculate the cost of your child's care both now and in the future. Think about ongoing needs and how you can best estimate meeting them both now and in the future. One thing with respect to just thinking about the child's care or the child with the disabilities care, you may want to consider, or you must consider, the other part of that equation, and that is what would happen to you if something were to happen. Because with the advances in technology, with the advances in medication, a lot of children with disabilities are going to outlive their parents, but it doesn't mean that their parent may not get sick uh, before expiring. So life insurance has more than one job these days. It has to protect living benefits. What happens if I get sick and don't die? And also what happens when I do finally expire. So when you're choosing life insurance products, it's very important to ask those questions. What job am I assigning this life insurance to do for me and my family? You're the CEO, the life insurance is the employee. And you all know if you hire the wrong employee, the job is not going to get done. So when you're considering your life insurance, that's one of the big things to consider. Also, you have to consider both now and in the future, what type of expenses may be needed for my child. Uh, what medications, if there's going to be adaptive uh, things like wheelchairs or bedding, um, therapies, transportation, housing. Life insurance covers all of those, and depending on what the disability is, sometimes that's a big number. Sometimes it's a much. It's always going to be a big number, and so, but sometimes it's going to be a much larger number. And when you look at that, that's where you have to consider that there is no one size that fits all. I mean, there has been studies that will say that a child or a family who has a child with a disability may need coverage that is up to 5 times more in the future. And those numbers are accurate on the surface, but with the spectrum, the autism spectrum growing, cerebral palsy, there's been certain uh, growths and discoveries there where they are living longer, but not necessarily better. And then with all of the new disabilities that are being discovered, I pivoted my practice about 12 years ago into primarily the disability community, into the pastoral community, and I was discovering disabilities almost weekly for months and months and months that I had never heard. So modifying the recommendations and the life insurance products that I was looking for are companies that were going to be a little bit more friendly to the disability community is where I began to pursue certain business relationships. Um, well, another thing, and this is a tough thing, is estimating the cost uh, of those medical procedures that may be needed along the way, all the way up and through the lifetime of the child. And discussing that subject matter can be tough sometimes when you're talking about anybody that is a loved one, when you have to address their demise. But it's a tough conversation to have sometimes, but it's also one that it has to be had. Also, when you're looking at life insurance, will my loved one, will my child with a disability, will they ever be able to live on their own? Or will they always need some type of constant care, whether it's 24 hours a day, 12 hours, or whatever that care is, versus independent living? There's a huge waiting list in the state of Georgia when it comes to independent living housing. Hopefully that will change soon if the right policies are put in place. But that's a lengthy process. So that's another thing. Because what we're doing with the life insurance, other than answering the question, what would happen to my child or loved one with a disability when I'm no longer there, we're wanting to also plan for them, for their lives or their quality of life to not be interrupted or disrupted because of the financial resources not being in place. So when we look at those and we start checking off all of those boxes, the one thing that we have to do is take all of those expenses that may be needed, and then look at what government benefits that they may also be entitled to. And once you look at all of those expenses, couple in or factor in those government benefits or subtract those government benefits, that'll give you a pretty good baseline as to what amount of life insurance you may need. Um, and after you do that, now it's time to start looking for the right type of life insurance policy, whether that is permanent life insurance, whether that is temporary life insurance, or whether that is um, a combination of both of them. And looking at certain life insurance strategies. What type of life insurance strategy may be available to me? I just want to mention one or two types, and the one that kind of gets overlooked a little bit um, is the second to die policies. And these type of policies is a policy where you have one policy that covers 2 lives, and it pays at the expiration of the second person in the policy that's covered in the policy. And these type of policies, they're fairly regular in life insurance planning. But what they do is they will help contain costs with as respect to having one policy versus 2 policies on 2 individual policies on 2 individuals, as opposed to one policy that covers 2 individuals. But again, there is no one size that fits all. Um, so it may very well take two individual policies in order to meet the needs uh, of that particular family. And one of the things that you look at it, when this when you're going to determine if that is going to be suitable is you'll have to look at the health of those two individual parties, and most of the time it's husband and wife. um, 95% of the time it's husband and wife. Oftentimes there is a policy that has been an older life insurance policy that just may need to be updated. And there's a strategy of the 1035 exchange, which will allow you to move from one policy to another, especially if there's cash value in a permanent policy without any of the tax consequences. And I wanted to use those two in particular just to make this one point. And that point is review at least once a year annually. Take a look, do that annual review on all of your life planning, not only life insurance, but pension plans. Uh, if there's 401ks, 403bs for those in the nonprofit sector, but reviewing those policies and doing beneficiary reviews is vital to make sure that your plan is always up to date. And that, and because over time, certain people, they don't want the responsibilities when you're doing the planning. And as you know, a lot making sure that some of these life insurance policies will go into a special needs trust as opposed to leaving um, a beneficiary that you think you can trust. And that's a decision that the family has to make as a whole. But always, when you're thinking about a beneficiary in your life insurance, make sure that if you're not leaving it in a trust, that it is someone that you can trust. And that's not necessarily a family member always. So those are just some of the considerations when you are looking at the life insurance portion of the planning. And when you're doing that, and you consider just those things, and if you can just check off those few little boxes, I think that that is a very good start on in helping you navigate the life insurance portion of your entire life special needs life plan. So I think that's about it. I don't want to bore you too much with life insurance, and I would be happy to entertain any questions or concerns that you have.
Thank you so much, Rick. Feel free for anybody to put into the chat any questions you have to add. And I'd like to hand it over to Michael and David now.
Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you very much for the opportunity. So,
thanks, Rick. I thought you did a great job. We appreciate you and your time and commitment to this specialty of planning for families who have a special needs situation. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Kipnis. My partner, David Morrow, is sharing the screen with me. We have been working in the special needs planning area for over 10 years now, both been in the financial services industry for 30 plus years. And we have a short slide presentation, which we're going to run through, being sensitive to the time that you guys have all blocked out. Just a little bit of our background. I know that Dr. Brasher read our bios, but we spend a lot of time working with individuals and families who have situations where they were not expected to be in. Rick did a really good job of explaining, one financial instrument, life insurance, that is typically part of the estate planning and the special needs planning. David and I have a lot of connections in Metro Atlanta. Our office is at the Perimeter, which is Dunwoody, Sandy Springs area of Atlanta. A lot of our meetings are calls and Zoom calls now because of what we've all learned to adapt to after COVID. So we certainly would welcome any follow-up conversations with any of you. If there are things that we touch on tonight that make sense for you and your planning and your family. So David, why don't we go ahead and get through the slides and hopefully leave some time for questions as well.
So this is a presentation that one that we've given in various forms multiple times, and it's compliance approved, and really not talking about um, product or strategy, but more of high level as far as recommendations for you. So we'll go through it. Um, you always got to start off with a disclosure. So we'll allow you to read that if you'd like, but what we really wanted to talk about was, life care plan and how that can be beneficial for you. And the timeline involved, misconceptions, the steps involved, a letter of intent, um, and don't know how many people have heard that term before. How to get started. I think a lot of people think that they're on an island and they've got to recreate the process, and that's not the case. You really need to think of this as being a village, and why recreate things? But if we can, all help each other, that's great. And then just the importance of overall integrated planning. Mike, you want to go or me?
Sure, I'll jump in. First question is, what is a life care plan? What is it? Why does my dependent need one? And how do I create one? It's really about coordinating your family with a number of different specialists and advisors that will be heavily involved in your process of creating a plan, building a plan, and executing a plan. Certainly people like David and myself and Rick, and you'll soon hear from Heather Nadler, are folks that could be part of the process. You also might want to have access to a good CPA or tax person. Financial people like bankers are helpful, trust officers. We won't get into too much detail on that, but it's really a team effort. You can't really assume that one person can be the quarterback for all of your planning needs. And I think part of sharing these topics tonight will give you a little bit better idea of who might be a good resource for you. We have a lot of referrals that we can give out. Heather Nadler and our firm work with a lot of clients jointly. And that's just because she's such a good specialist in her planning area. And we do a pretty good job as well in ours.
Now, one thing to consider is there's no one that's going to love your child more than yourself. But what you want is, if something were to happen to you, not only do you have the estate plans, but do you have a plan in place as far as for your loved one, so that they would be able to step in if need be to make sure that they're taken care of. So that's kind of what we'll be going over, and the high level theme to this. So as far as timelines, I think it's age appropriate. I think a lot of people are familiar with a number of resources for kids that are younger than 18. But as I think we all know, as our kids get older and older, those resources aren't as evident, and it's not as clear. So before 18, you're talking about waivers, you're talking about survivor benefits, you're talking about early intervention, you're talking about education plans, IEPs, 504s. My daughter had an IEP up through 5th grade and just lost it. And it was a really bad situation. So once you have it, you don't want to let it go, as we know. And, transition planning is as they move into their teenage years, and getting up to the 18 mark, and then building that structure. And then when after 18, talking about things in place, and you don't want to put anything in place that might jeopardize assistance they might be receiving now or in the future. So SSI, what does that look like? Guardianship, once again, legal structure, Medicaid, Medicare, children's disability benefit, and where that child is in a spectrum, or where they are in that overall environment, to SSDI, what it looks like, as far as college, what does it look like as far as living, is that child going to be on your payroll, or are they going to be able to be self-sufficient, and what degree? So, talking about those things. Mike, you want to go next?
A lot of people are overwhelmed. This is an emotional time to make decisions for your child, your niece, your nephew, whatever the case may be. Sometimes it seems easier to just put your head in the sand and not really address these issues that are very important. So people assume you got to pay a lot of money to get the right advice. I would say there are certain planning strategies that things like this is not a hard cost. I think you should all take in as much free information as you can, whether it's webinars like this or, contacting people individually and getting on their website. There's a lot of research that can be done. So it would not be unaffordable. A lot of folks are assuming that, worst case scenario, someone else will jump in. Obviously today we've got something called GoFundMe on Facebook, and usually it pops up when something really bad happens to a family and they're in financial trouble. And you're just hoping that, maybe even complete strangers will jump in and help out. But that's really not a plan. People assume trust accounts are for rich people. We work a lot with folks like Heather in helping design trusts that will have assets flow into them, but maybe not immediate assets. What Rick talked about earlier with some of his life insurance examples, a lot of insurance proceeds that are distributed at the time of death, if they're properly structured into a trust, they will be free of income and estate taxes and may get delivered most efficiently to your loved one. Even if you have a basic will, I'm glad you have a basic will. That's better than not having a will at all. The state of Georgia has a will for everyone who dies without a will, and it is certainly not designed to save you money on taxes, but a basic will probably doesn't address some of the planning that you need to look at if you're managing a household with a special needs child. Another thing we see a lot, and David and I had a call today with a couple who have three children. The middle child has cerebral palsy and is deaf and blind, and the other siblings are 21 and 14, and it's really too early to tell if those siblings are going to be wanting to take care of this other sibling. Again, when the parents pass away, that would be the hope, but do you want to put an emotional and financial burden on your other children if you don't have a good financial plan in place? So that's why, taking a look at this ahead of time, a lot of the planning that we do is literally 20 to 30 years out to build a solution. Because if you do not, if you don't outlive your child with special needs, it's unusual. And if you pass away before them, which is the actuarial tables, you want to make sure that the financial house is in order, and a trust and a will can do that. And it's not as expensive as you might think.
I think also, we have that expectation that, a sibling is going to be there to take care of the sibling. And, we hear a lot as far as you want the siblings to care about their sibling, but maybe not necessarily care for them. We hear a lot about prayer, but it's not necessarily the good pray. We hear people praying on others. A lot of people have heard about the senior community being taken advantage of, and we see a lot of it as far as on the special needs. A lot of advisors got into this because they think there are lots of dollars flowing through the trusts, and people might be making good money, but that doesn't necessarily mean they have a lot of discretionary or disposable, but they still have needs. So it's putting things in place, and a lot of people, we know what the divorce rate is like in situation. A lot of these people don't think they have good people to assist in this. They don't have family members or people that are close to them in proximity to be able to be there for them. And it's talking through and figuring out, who might be a good person to care for the child, but who might be a good person to take care of the finances, and having that multiple people sometimes to be there for that checks and balance. There are steps involved. I think this is a good list, but it's pretty comprehensive list, but it's not limited. But making sure that you're addressing the primary issues. Having a vision in place as far as truly what do you want to get accomplished, and if something were to happen to you tomorrow, do you have your ducks in a row, financially, estate wise, legally? Do you have the right people in place? Because you need that village. Guardianship, executors, they're key people that you need to have in key positions. What type of financial resources do you have? Just because you might not have huge amount of resources, you still need to get things accomplished. So that's where you need to, prioritize things, and knowing what the plan costs are, but taking into account inflation. What does that look like? Because as Mike talked about, we're not necessarily planning for tomorrow. We might be planning for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. We're not necessarily dealing in a normal financial situation where we're planning for, the parents, we're planning for, the kids, and really stretching it. That letter of intent is really important. And I think we have a great document to be able to assist that, that you're able to modify. But, I think the letter of intent is important, but I also think, a playbook is important, that if something were to happen to you tomorrow and no one's going to love your kid like you do, would someone be able to step in, and they're going to know the things, they're going to know what foods your kids like? Are they going to know what things calm them down, or things that, set them off? So I would recommend that you have that little notebook at your nightstand as you think of things, to write things down. What is key music for them? Just the little things, so that if you're not around, who could step in and try to properly take care of your child? The legal documents and instruments, and making sure those things are in place. The trust, the able account. I think there, a lot of terms are thrown out there, and truly understanding them and what's appropriate. Having the family meeting, I think that's key. It's one thing to have the estate, planning, but does the family know what your intent is? Do they know, and can they step in? Do they know where, the bank accounts are? Do they know where the passwords are? But do they know what your intent is for the child, so that you're all on the same page? And we see a lot of times, especially in beneficiaries, are there changes in the plan? A lot of times we see in beneficiaries, spouses that are now exes are still involved, and maybe legally they need to be, but you want to make sure that it's reviewed. And have things changes? Are there new resources? Are there resources that are no longer, to make sure that it's, you talk about an insurance document, a certificate, that certificate's really only as good as the day that it's set up. But, a few months or a year down the road, it could change. So you want to make sure you're reviewing it, and not only reviewing it, but also making the appropriate changes. Mike, you want to go?
Yeah, letter of intent, David's talked a little bit about it. It's personalizing how you would envision the ideal next person in charge. It's not a legal document, but it's considered by courts. It talks about specific things of your child, of his or her particular needs, explicit information. It's a work in progress. You should update it regularly. We have templates available. We send them out. You can edit them. You can fill in the blanks. If you don't like the way it's worded, we can have our legal team take a look at it. And you want input from everyone, because you might make the assumption that certainly certain family members would absolutely step up and take charge. You hear words like guardian and trustee and executor, which are big and somewhat overwhelming words, but a guardian of this person might be completely different than the person who manages the money. The guardian may be the person that's the warmest, closest person to your special needs son or daughter, but may not have good skills with financial management. So you might have a different person be the trustee to manage the assets. So I think it's important. It's updated regularly, and it's something that's what we would call work in progress.
How to get started, and it's understanding, what are the needs going to be, and understand the plan and what you want to get accomplished. I think if you really have those bedrocks in place, I think that's key, and then you build from there. We kind of talked about it as far as what are the needs going to be, what are housing, educational, working, social, recreational, medical care. I mean, there's so many things to take into account, that you want to love your child, you want to protect your child, but at times there's only so much you can do, but you want to make sure that they're able to make the most out of life, but you want to take those things into account. Mike, you want to go?
There's some resources that, are available. Obviously, if you know your family and the family is close, you can have the discussion of who might be financially capable of supporting the child as he or she gets older. You obviously should review any benefits you get through your company if you're employed. Certain group benefits like life and health insurance, disability income insurance, 401k retirement plans are factors in the planning process. Government benefits, Social Security, Medicaid, all things that are moving targets. And I think David said it earlier, and you really want to be careful with assets that flow through to your special needs child Social Security number. We had a situation where a grandparent inadvertently left the grandchild with special needs a $250,000 life insurance death benefit, which was probably harmless and thought that was the right thing to do. But ultimately, when those assets showed up in that child's bank account and Social Security number, a lot of the government benefits that he was going to be receiving or planning to receive were reduced or eliminated altogether. And then we've talked about legal planning as well, which Heather will get into more detail, and beneficiary arrangements. Like David said, you might have signed up for a group life insurance policy 15 years ago, and it was your first wife, and now you're on your third wife, and all of a sudden you didn't realize that the person you're leaving the money to isn't even involved in your family. So those things are always important to review.
So, when you talk about guardianship, you want to make sure you have the right people in place, and taking all those things into account: financial, medical, residential, education, social. Is it limited? As means, checks and balance. What decision making do you want them to have? Does a conservatorship make a difference? We were talking about this with my daughter, about our daughter today. Medical power of attorney. Here in Georgia at 12, parents, without documentation, we're not able to know everything. So, taking those things into account, from power of attorney, what happens at 18, and beyond. And then talking about the special needs trust, I don't know if Heather's going to be talking about that, but there's so many involved. What is it going to mean? What is it going to provide? What are the restrictions involved? So you really want to have a true understanding of what's out there, and is it truly doing what you want to do? Because once again, if something were to happen, you want to have your ducks in a row. Mike, you want to talk about ABLE quick?
Yeah, I think we're running out of time, but if you haven't heard about the ABLE Act that President Obama put in place in 2014, it's kind of been modeled after a college education fund called a 529 account. In fact, these are pretty much becoming interchangeable. It's an account that you can accumulate money for without paying taxes on. It can be set up by a bank, by people like David and myself and Rick. It's not hiding money. It's just another way to put money in a more efficient vehicle, so it won't count against your Social Security income or Medicaid. And it does take a little bit of research to get that done properly, but there's a website, www.ablenrc.org. You can get all the state information that you need right there. And if we haven't said it already, I think Dr. Brasher is going to make these slides available, and you can, take pictures and do whatever you want, or reach out to David or myself. We're happy to send them out as well directly.
There are some limits. We can go over them. It's kind of a moving target each year, so it's always interesting to see where the new numbers are coming out. But those are the current account limits and key numbers. And then just talking about integrated planning, and I think when talking about planning and your advisors, what we see a lot of times is a very linear approach. You talk with your CPA, you talk with your advisor, you talk to your attorney. What we don't see a lot of times is a collaborative approach. When we're talking to people, there might be legal implications, there might be tax implications. Wouldn't it be advantageous, for, as long as it's okay with you, for us to be talking so that the left hand knows what the right hand's doing? And if you're the CEO of your company or of your family, and we're really applying to be that CFO, our job is to give you information so you can make informed decisions. And while we don't have everything, if we're talking to those other people, then we're hopefully truly looking out for your best interest.
Thank you,
That's
David.
all we've got.
I
from
might
a
be a few
slide
minutes past, so I
perspective.
apologize.
Yeah,
No,
we appreciate your time. We're gonna pass the baton to Heather, and thanks again for Dr. Brasher for having us on the call, and we hope to meet up with some of you folks in the future. But thanks, David, and Heather, you're on.
Now batting cleanup.
Yeah.
That's it. All right, let me see if I can get slides going here. Thank you for bearing with me as I had my camera off. I was explaining as we were getting started that the pollen has gotten the best of me. So I'm over here coughing and all sorts of things. Not cute on camera, but I think I can keep it together for this part. So my name is Heather Nadler. I am an attorney. I practice elder and special needs law, as Dr. Brashard had said. And so I am going to talk about kind of the legal side of things here. And in a lot of ways, I think I have the easy part, because Medicaid and Social Security have rules. It's pretty black and white. I can tell you, what the rules are. Whereas when it comes to putting a set of rules in place for what really in real life makes your child happy, it's a lot more difficult. So everything they were talking about, letters of intent, are hugely important. Having a plan and a team, also very important. How to fund the plan. I agree with Rick that second to die policies are often overlooked, especially for younger families who are very much still in the accumulation phase. But gosh, if something happened right now, you would need to have that bucket of money. So lots of great information that has been shared here tonight. And there's my quick legal disclaimer, like Mike and David said, this is not legal advice. So the one thing that I want to focus on mostly here is special needs trust, because when we are looking at how we can protect your child's future, we're looking for a way to provide financial management for them, a way to preserve benefits. So there are a lot of different things that need to be taken into consideration. So a special needs trust does allow you to provide for that individual with disabilities without disrupting their public benefits. Like if the grandparents that Mike was talking about had left that $250,000 to a third-party special needs trust, we just all could have done a happy dance and been glad that it was there. But when it's not, and when it's left directly to the child, still can be fixable. by putting it into a first party special needs trust. But one of the things we'll talk about are the differences between those two. And there are certainly some drawbacks on that first party trust. So a special needs trust is designed to improve an individual's quality of life. You know, this is not one of the most common questions I get from parents is, what can a special needs trust not pay for? And really, a special needs trust can pay for pretty much anything. It's just you have to be careful about the manner in which it pays for it. But it's really quality of life money. It's not just doctors and hospitals and co-pays. It's trips to Disney and, you know, new cars and houses and things like that. So it's all about just having a pot of money and then coupling that with benefits so that ultimately you can prolong the use of all funds, whether private or public, that are available for your child. So public benefits 101, you know, at the end of the day, disability as defined by the Social Security Administration is a financial financial determination. Is this person able to engage in substantial gainful activity? And if they are not, is it by reason of a medically determinable impairment? And is that impairment expected to last for at least a year? And so at the end of the day, we're just looking at, okay, can this person support themselves? Oh, I pulled up the wrong slides here. We're actually at about 1,000, that last button, $1,470 a month is the current amount. So if there's any job that, so for instance, your child, you know, if we're looking at a disability by virtue of being on the autism spectrum, is there any job that your child could do for $1,470 a month in gross income? And if not, then because it's due to a disability, they meet the definition of disabled as far as Social Security is concerned and can potentially draw benefits. So once we clear that hurdle and say, okay, yes, this person is not able to work and be self-supporting, we then come to making a determination, all right, which track are we going to be on here? Are we going to be on insurance-based benefits, or are we going to be on welfare-based benefits? So the insurance-based benefits are based on an individual's work record. Now, it might not be the child, it might be the parent who worked and paid in and has a child who had a disability before turning age 22, in which case the child gets to grab onto the parent's record and draw when the parent starts drawing, whether the parent draws because they themselves retire, whether it's because the parent passes away, or if the parent became disabled, then that child who's associated with that work record can draw. But important to realize, for these insurance-based benefits, someone has to have worked and paid in to qualify. And on these, financial status is not relevant in making a determination on eligibility. You know, if Warren Buffett became disabled back before he was 65, then he could have drawn, and no one's ever going to ask, what do you have in the bank? You know, if you or I had been working, we paid into the system all these years, something happens, then we're going to be able to draw out without anyone asking, well, what have you got in the bank? So that's SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance. And after someone receives SSDI for 2 years, even if they're under the age of 65, they are eligible for Medicare. So those are the insurance-based benefits as opposed to the welfare-based benefits. So this comes into play when we have someone who does not have a work record. Either maybe they weren't disabled before age 22, therefore they weren't allowed to associate with a parent's work record, or they've never worked, or like it might be the case for a lot of you, when a child turns 18, I know there was a great slide that David was sharing that was saying, you know, before age 18, maybe there's not a whole lot out there. Maybe we've got Katie Beckett and, you know, some benefits, but then when the child turns 18, what mom and dad have in the bank no longer matters. Their income, their resources. So at that point, the child themselves can draw, they're their own independent economic unit. So when they hit age 18, in a lot of ways, it's like a light switch. And we say, oh, okay, well, this 18-year-old doesn't have anything and is not able to work and support herself. So that's when SSI can become a relevant benefit. But there is a financial component to that. In order to qualify for SSI and the Medicaid that comes along with it, in most states, if you're eligible for SSI, you are automatically eligible for Medicaid. And that is the case in Georgia. So when you're applying for those, there is the question of what have you got in your name? And in this case, when you're answering that question, it needs to be that you have $2,000 or less in the individual's name in order for them to qualify for SSI benefits. And in order to maintain their SSI benefits, they need to stay below that that $2,000 threshold. So that's where the big gift from the grandparents becomes a problem. For SSDI, for folks who have worked or perhaps became disabled later in life, I'm going to kind of gloss over this slide a little bit, but it's based on the quarters of coverage. So how much you have worked in the years prior to the time that you look to receive these benefits, and or the time that your child has worked before they look to receive these benefits. Now, it is possible for your child to work and accumulate a work record and start, maybe they turn 18, they get SSI for a while and they work and they accumulate an SSDI record, in which case maybe they start drawing SSDI on their own record, not on a parent's record. And so that can happen too. And for those benefits, there's not going to be that financial component, but a lot of times, even if they are drawing SSDI, it might be a small amount because maybe they've worked a lot, but they're not in a really high earning job. So maybe their SSDI is, going to be $400 a month. Well, the maximum SSI benefit is $943 a month. If we subtract the $500 that they're earning, actually we only count $250 of that. And so there is a possibility, long story short, to draw both SSI and SSDI on either a parent's record or on the child's record themselves. We certainly do see that happen. So SSI, the maximum benefit for 2024, this will be a good example of how it increases a little bit each year. For 2024, it is $943 per month. And that is the maximum benefit that someone can get through SSI. And they must have less than $2,000 in countable resources and also less than the allowable amount, which now is $943 per month in countable income. When a person is working, another misconception, I think, is that people think, well, gosh, if my child goes on benefits, she can't work. And that's not true at all. So the 943 is the maximum benefit that someone could receive. Of course, they need to, if they can earn more than 1,470, they're not going to pass the test for being determined disabled. But let's assume your child's making $1,000 a month. So they make $1,000 a month. SSI actually does not count that full $1,000 against them. They only count 500 of that income. So your child could potentially get the 943, but Social Security is already saying, well, they've got $500 in countable income. So they reduced the SSI down to 493. And then, but then they've got the $1,000 on top of that. So they're still up to potentially making, $1,500 a month. And that is allowable. So I think it's very important. And it's a common misconception for parents to think, well, gosh, my child can't work if we go on these benefits. So if you have got someone who's receiving these benefits, oftentimes I will ask parents, family members, siblings, if it's a point in time where the siblings are stepping in and taking over, and I say, okay, what benefits is your sibling getting, is your child getting? And sometimes I get a blank look back. Also on our intake forms, when we send those out prior to an appointment, we'll say Social Security, and we have a blank for the person to fill in the amount of money, and then there's a box to check SSI or SSDI. And I'd say probably about 50% of the time people don't commit because they're like, I don't know. The check that comes or the direct deposit that comes, it just says Social Security. So we don't know. So certainly one way to figure that out is to say, okay, well, how much is the check or the deposit in the first place? If it's $943, then we know, hey, guess what? That is Social Security. That's SSI. If they are receiving more than one deposit, maybe they're getting $500 deposit and another $443 deposit, then we know, okay, well, that's an SSI deposit and an SSDI deposit. Then I will ask, a big one is, okay, well, is your loved one on Medicare? Because if that person is under 65 and is on Medicare, that tells us straight away that that's an SSDI beneficiary, because that's the only way you can get it if you're under the age of 65. So sometimes it takes a little detective work to figure that out. And the reason it's so important is when we're looking at, well, gosh, do we, maybe we need a trust for this individual for the financial management, but do we need it to be a special needs trust? If we're dealing with those means tested benefits, SSI and Medicaid, well then yes, absolutely. If we're dealing with SSDI and Medicare, maybe not, if we don't anticipate a need for Medicaid down the road. So that's why it's so important to be able to do that, planning. So, a lot of people will think, okay, yes, I need to get a will and then check, I've done my estate planning, but there's really a lot more to estate planning than just a will. But certainly a last will and testament is an important part of it, as well as powers of attorney. A lot of parents get, all concerned when the child turns 18, they think, oh, well, we need to determine, can my child sign powers of attorney or can we do guardianship? But maybe they've never reflected and looked at that for themselves. So very important for parents to sign powers of attorney as well, both financial and medical. And then when it comes to getting a plan in place, likely in your situation, we're saying, okay, we want to leave money for this child or young adult, hopefully old adult by the time, just for your sake, you live a long time and they're older, but we want to leave money for this person. So that it can provide them with quality of life, but how is it actually going to be managed? So the magic language in a special needs trust, and sometimes you will hear these called supplemental needs trusts, and I like that verbiage because I think it gives a good example of what we can expect. So use this money to supplement the beneficiary, not to support them or not to supplant public benefits. And then a lot of parents will go, whoa, wait, I want this money to be able to be used to support my child. And I say, well, yes, but we're going to word it carefully. And that's what makes the special needs trust work. If you were to pull out a current will that you have in place that maybe is leaving funds for a typical child, then you're going to say, okay, yeah, use it for their maintenance, education, support, and health. If you've got just like a minor, because we don't want to leave money to the minor, so we put it into a trust, and maybe that trust is going to stay in place until they're 30 years old. And in the meantime, it says use it for maintenance, education, support, and health of that child. If Medicaid and Social Security see that word support, which I refer to as a 4-letter word in my world, if they see that money that said the trust that says use this money to support the beneficiary, then they're going to say, great, go use that trust, support the beneficiary, and when it's gone, come back and we'll talk about benefits. Well, by that point in time, then there's no funding set aside to pay for things above and beyond the very basic needs that Medicaid will meet. So that's why we want to make sure that we've got the trust drafted properly, stating that we're going to supplement and not support or supplant benefits. So you tell the trustee at that point in time, consider other benefits and then use this money to supplement. That mere instruction to tell them to consider, I'm oversimplifying a bit, but just telling the trustee to consider other benefits, then that's enough to make Medicaid and Social Security not be able to count that trust against your child. So there are different types of special needs trust. I'm going to talk here first about what's known as a first party special needs trust. Now, this is not the kind of trust that you would leave an inheritance to. This is a trust that is used for people who have already got money. The young man that Mike mentioned, who now has $250,000. Oh, shoot. Or if we've got someone who had been in a car accident and and is recovering, or a birth injury or something, and so they're recovering money that is legally theirs, then that money goes into a first party special needs trust. So to do this, the beneficiary has to be under 65 years of age. The trust itself has to be established by a parent, grandparent, court, or guardian, or by the beneficiary, him or herself. And it's for the sole benefit. You will also hear these called sole benefit trusts. And that means that any expenditure that comes out of that trust must be for the sole benefit of the individual. And then the biggest difference between first party trusts, and what we're going to discuss in just a minute, which is third party trusts, is it has to have a Medicaid payback provision. So it's basically Medicaid saying, okay, Heather, I recognize that you got really injured in this accident. And so we're going to let you put your money into a first party trust. But when you pass away, you've got to pay us Medicaid back. So you only pay back Medicaid. You don't have to pay back Social Security. But so when I was saying before, yeah, if someone inherits or, comes into money, then we can fix it as long as they're under the age of 65 by using the special needs trust, but it does require a payback provision. And so that's why it would never be my go-to for using funds or for leaving funds to an individual. But times when first party trusts are appropriate, a personal injury settlement, or funds have already been gifted or inherited by the individual, or maybe someone just became disabled later in life and had accumulated assets, and we need to put those aside. Divorce involving a spouse or a child with special needs, first party trusts are used for that. So of course, if the individual getting divorced is going to be splitting up assets, then you can put that into a special needs trust. But if there's a child who's going to be receiving child support beyond the age of 18 when they're getting SSI, that child support can decrease the amount of the SSI. So we would ideally use a special needs trust and saying, okay, fine, yes, we're going to pay the child support above age 18, but we're going to pay it to the special needs trust so that the child can continue to get that full 943. So in family law instances, there are places for first party trust too. So third party special needs trust, this is what you would want to have in your estate planning. So when you're saying I leave, if you've got 3 kids and you say I leave 1/3 of my estate to each of my children, one of whom has special needs, I'm going to create a special needs trust for them, and I'm going to leave them the very same 1/3 that their siblings are getting, or maybe a larger percentage. It all depends on a lot of that financial analysis that is done that, Rick and Mike and David were talking about. Once you come up with that magic number and you decide how it is that, how much you want your child to have, and then you decide how you're going to fund it. So for instance, if you've got life insurance through Rick, then you're going to just name the trust as the beneficiary of that. That's very important, because if you were to say, okay, yes, this is for my child with special needs, and you just put that child's name on there, then that's going to mess up benefits. Whereas if you have your beneficiary saying, you know what, go directly to that trust, then we're not going to mess up benefits, not going to have a payback. And there's no age restriction. You can set these trusts up even if someone is over the age of 65. The trust can also be used to accept gifts and inheritance from multiple individuals. So if you set up a trust for your loved one, and then there are grandparents, aunts, uncles, siblings, whoever wants to leave money to it, you've created the bucket, and it's very easy for them to just amend their will and say, hey, I want to leave stuff for, Bob, but put it into that special needs trust. So, preference for me is a third party inter vivos special needs trust, which is a fancy way of saying living trust. And the reason I say it's a preference is because we can set this trust up, and you could serve as the trustee of it, get a feel for it, figure out how it works, even if it's not going to have much in it, can go ahead and get it approved by the Georgia Department of Community Health, because if a beneficiary is on Medicaid, then the special needs trust does have to be approved. Also, annual accountings have to get filed. So I really like to be able to a lot of parents really like to be able to go ahead and get it set up so that it's less work then for the person who's going to be taking over when the time comes. But I also think it's great because the parents then get to serve as the trustee, and then they can pass along some of that practical knowledge that is going to make it easier for that successor trustee, whether it's a sibling, a aunt, uncle, cousin, whoever it is, it's going to take over. The more information they can have, and certainly the more experience that the resigning trustee or the trustee has passed away has provided ahead of time, it's going to be a lot better. But the alternative to that is and this I would say would be the minimum of what you should have would be at least, even if you don't set up the trust now, there should be a provision in your will that creates the trust. So you've got the framework, but it's just that when you pass away, the person you've designated as your trustee is going to have to actually get it set up, open the bank account, get it approved by DCH, which is fine. I always tell clients, you'll be gone, not your problem. But, you know, as long as you're naming someone that you think can handle that sort of thing. But it's, you know, even this testamentary trust is going to be a third party special needs trust. And so it works well, avoids the payback. You can, even with a third party trust, you can still, a testamentary trust, you can still name it as the beneficiary in life insurance. It's just you have to wait to go through the probate process for the will to be approved by the probate court before, even if the insurance company is ready to cut the check, they can't cut it yet if the will has not been through the probate process. All right, so I think I did pretty well on my timing there. So happy to take any questions, and I know that Mike and Rick and David are ready for them too.
Thank you, everyone, for providing all that information. There's just so much to consider, and I really appreciate all your expertise and your background in those different areas. We do have one question, and hopefully more will come in, and it might just take, I know for me, it's going to take me to digest a lot of this information, but I really appreciate you all. But there was a question about, and I think Heather, maybe you could help us with this. First party S&T sounds similar to ABLE account. So is the first party S&T allowed to support extra housing costs, et cetera? What are your thoughts?
Great question. So an ABLE account is like a first party special needs trust in some ways and not like it in others. And they can actually work very well hand in hand. Whoever wrote this question is clearly, this is not their first rodeo. But let me give some background for those who might not be as familiar. So when a beneficiary is on SSI, you get that $943 a month. But if someone is helping support you and you're on SSI, so if someone else is paying for your food and shelter items, you get a 1/3 reduction. So right now that would mean if you're living with mom and dad for free, or if mom and dad are paying your rent, or if your special needs trust is paying your rent, then you're going to have a 1/3 reduction in your SSI. But the difference between an ABLE account and a first party special needs trust is that if the ABLE account is paying that food and shelter expense, it actually does not reduce by the 1/3. So the way that this often plays out is, say we've got someone who has, you know, mom and dad pass away and we've got a third party special needs trust, or maybe there was a settlement and they've got a first party special needs trust. If either of those trusts is used to pay the rent for this individual, they're going to lose 1/3 of their SSI. But if an ABLE account is used to pay it, then you don't lose it. So what you can actually do is, let's say each month you needed to pay $1,000. Well, rather than paying it out of the special needs trust, you take it out of the special needs trust, put it into the ABLE account, and then turn around and pay it out of the ABLE account. And that very same $1,000 that came out of the special needs trust and went into the ABLE account does not disqualify. So in a lot of ways, the ABLE account is like a first party trust. Like, it does have a Medicaid payback, just the way a first party trust does. Another big difference is an ABLE account can only accept, right now it's $18,000 per year. And unless the individual is working, then you can get like another $13,000 or something like that. But there are limitations on how much. So for instance, let's say you got a $100,000 personal injury settlement. Well, we can't put that into an ABLE account all at once because you can only do so much a year. But at the same time, if you can put money over there every month to kind of siphon off and pay those benefits and protect the full SSI. So long story short, on the answer to that question, if it comes out of a special needs trust, yes, it's still going to reduce your SSI benefit, but you can funnel it over to the ABLE account from the special needs trust and then pay, and you're all good.
Amazing, Heather. There's a couple more questions. So what happens to the money in the trust after the special needs child dies?
So if it's a third-party trust, then whoever sets up the trust gets to say where it goes. So if I say I'm setting this up for my child with special needs, and then when my child passes away, it goes to that child's descendants, if there are any, and if there aren't any, then it goes to my other children or it goes to charity. As long as it's a third-party trust, then the person who sets up the trust gets to dictate where that money goes. If it's a first party trust, you have to pay Medicaid back first, but Medicaid doesn't just get all of it. If if they've expended $200,000 and there's $500,000 left in the trust, then they get their 200,000, and the 300,000, same deal, can go to whoever was designated as the remainder beneficiaries.
Very helpful. Another question is, can the executor of the will set up the trust if they are also a trustee?
Yes, they can. So, and a lot of times that's the way it works, because let's face it, we all have the go-to people in our lives, and that's the person we trust to settle our estate and to stay on as the trustee for our child. So yes, that's not a conflict.
Thank you, Heather. Here is a broad question. What has your experience been with patients who have come in who have dealt with schools? A lot of patients they see are shocked to see that their child is not going to college. How have you dealt with that? In addition, what is your opinion of self-directed benefits in Georgia?
I think self-directed benefits are wonderful. So that is, again, for those who might not have as much familiarity, there are Medicaid waivers where you can get, essentially when you get awarded this waiver, it's a budget. And so you can either choose to self-direct your budget, which means you hire your own caregivers, decide how that money is going to get spent. Or you can leave it up to the care provider and to the state to make those determinations. So definitely a fan of self-directed. You can pay more per hour. You have more freedom in who you're hiring. But the problem with self-direction is who's going to do it if the parent is not here and the child is not capable. It's a lot. It's a lot to manage. And there are focus groups, Rick Thompson with Champions Place. If anyone is interested in learning more about that, that's a passion project that and a lot of the folks at Champions Place have going on. I'm sure he would love to talk to you about that. And then as far as schooling options, I will see, folks in my office who are going on to some sort of higher education, whether it's one of the inclusive kind of programs. Of course, I give my shout out, for instance, to the Auburn Eagles program as an Auburn alum, or Destination Dogs, or, any of the others. And so I certainly do see people that have gone on to those programs and had success. They are certainly not inexpensive. And so that's kind of one of the drawbacks amongst a lot of those programs. But, and then for those who aren't going to follow that track, you've got day programs and voc rehab and other options just to build a skill set. Obviously, it's very useful to build a skill set and have meaningful work, however that might play out.
That's a great reminder that when individuals are transitioning, not every individual is going to go on to college, and that doesn't mean that they're not having a successful transition. It just has to be personalized to the individual.
Yeah,
so, thank you. Let's see, can we clarify if an individual with special needs is living at home, is that still considered as getting rent paid?
It is. So if a child lives with a parent rent-free, then Social Security will say, hey, guess what? That's being supported or supplemented, so therefore we're going to reduce your benefit. So the answer there can be to enter into a rental agreement with the child. Social Security has standard forms, and you can put that rental agreement in place. Then the child does actually have to pay the rent. To having the agreement in place is not enough. Then the child pays the rent. And I always tell parents, once the child pays you that rent, it's your money and you can do whatever the heck you want with it, including putting it over into a third-party trust to kind of just stash it away and maximize, the whole pieces of the pie. It is taxable income, or at least a portion of it, to the parents. So that comes into play as a consideration as well.
Very helpful. For testamentary third-party S&T, would the will still have to be probated if the estate is under the millions of dollars the IRS caps?
Yes. So you're absolutely right about the millions of dollars. You know, before we have to worry about estate tax right now, it's about $12.9 million per person, or $26 million per couple. And I hope that all of our financial advisors clients are dealing with that on a daily basis. And I can assure you that I am not with my clients. But the amount of the estate has no bearing on whether or not it has to be probated. Probate is all about, are there assets that are sitting there in the decedent's, the nice way for saying the dead person, the decedent's name, that no one can get to. You know, if you've got an IRA that has a beneficiary on it, okay, great. Don't need to probate that. If you've got life insurance that has a beneficiary, don't need to probate that. If you've got a jointly titled account, goes to the surviving owner, don't need to probate that. But if you've got an account, a CD, a home, something that's there just in your name, regardless of value, it's going to have to go through probate.
Great.
And if you have a testamentary trust, then you have to go through that probate process. Even if that trust were being entirely funded with life insurance and retirement accounts, you still would have to go through the probate process to bring that trust into life, to get the executor sworn in and give the executor the power to then set up the trust.
I think this is the comment, but just to clarify, or in our earlier scenario that we were saying, if they're paying rent, or they could use the rent to pay for the needed life insurance to fund the S&T. Is that right?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
If the child is paying the parents rent while they're living at home, and you were saying they could take that money and put it into a third-party trust or do anything they
Right.
want with it, could they use it to pay for the needed life insurance to fund
Yes,
that?
absolutely. Yes, because it's no different than if they had another tenant that was paying them monthly income. It's theirs once they did it. So yes, absolutely.
Okay. And do we have a good name for the third-party special needs trust if you should not use their name? Let's see.
Well,
What
you
if it's
can use an individual's name, and we typically do. Sometimes we won't, depending on the importance of this to the beneficiary, whether it's going to bother the beneficiary. They might not like the name special needs in the trust itself. So maybe we're just calling it the Susan Brasher Life Trust, or I mean, you can call it whatever you want as long as it has the right stuff in there. But it doesn't create problems to use the name. I think this question probably is relating to like what Mike was talking about with social security number and cross-referencing. But it's okay to have that name in there.
great. If they didn't want to use the name, for example, do you have suggestions on what name would you use?
I would actually prefer to use the beneficiary's name in there and maybe, tweak the rest, because it's, it makes it clear who this trust is for and who they darn well better be using this money for. Like, no confusion. This is not for all the kids. This is for one kid. But certainly taking away, you can call it a family trust. You can call it a life trust. You can, anything that you want to call it, just the Susan Brasher Trust. That'd be fine too. It's more about what's in it.
Great. Thank you.
The document itself.
And that was all the questions that we had. Does Rick or David or Michael, did you have anything else that you wanted to share, or any other things you wanted to end on?
Excuse me. Yeah, one quick thing, just to piggyback off of something Attorney Nadler had mentioned, and that was the SSDI and that 24-month threshold when you then qualify for Medicare, which is original Medicare, A, B, and Part A, Part B, and Part D. But keep in mind, along with that, you also qualify, and you see Jimmy Walker and Joe Namath on the commercials all the time. You also qualify for Medicare Advantage plans, the special needs Medicare Advantage plans. So keep that in mind, because a lot more often than not, the additional benefits in those Medicare Advantage plans will provide a much better quality of life when it comes to your health care, because they do offer dental, vision, and some of the other things. And some of them are quite comprehensive. Not all of them are HMOs. There's some PPO plans and point of service plans as well. So You know, you don't have to be 65 to qualify for Medicare Advantage plans. But I mean, a child, the youngest one that I've done or been involved in, the child was 9 years old. And she now has a dual special needs Medicare Advantage plan. So I just wanted to add that.
Great.
That's a great point. It can often give you, you know, broader access to providers as well if you just stick to the Medicare bucket.
Right.
Great points. Well, on behalf of the AAC, I just want to thank everybody who attended and thank all our panelists tonight for bringing all these wonderful conversations and expertise. We will be sure to send out the slides and any resources that you think would be helpful to the email in which everybody registered. So I just want to thank everyone. And it seems in the chat, everyone's very appreciative of everyone here as well. So thank you for your time and your expertise and everything you all are doing.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much for
Brasher.
having me.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right, we'll see you next month for our April Autism Awareness and Acceptance, where we'll be having an in-person program at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, where we'll be learning more about Early Point, some technology that the Marcus Autism Center is actually going to be piloting going forward.
Great.
Thank you.
All
Have a
right,
good
thank
night.
you.